Are you awake?
Oh my god. Well, I am now. Jesus Christ. What happened last night?
I was going to ask you the same question.
Oh my god, wait. What's the last thing you remember? I just remember, God, we went to the tavern.
Yeah.
And then we went to the inn.
Yeah.
And then we went to the ale house.
Yeah.
And then those monks brought us back to the monastery.
I don't remember that part, so thank you for that.
There was that strapping young maiden.
Yeah, okay, I was going to mention a strapping young maiden. Thank you for... Because there's a strapping young maiden in my bedchamber.
Oh, wait, the blonde one? The one that's built like an ox?
Yes.
Oh my god, what did we do?
I don't know, but here's the thing. I've just been in the living room. Your laptop is open. I think we recorded a podcast episode before we left for the tavern. I think if we listen back to it, we'll be able to figure out what went wrong.
Oh my god, okay, we need to get to the bottom of this. Brother Wilhelm, I'm sorry, you can't stay for breakfast.
Who's that?
Okay. I'll put my clothes on. Alright, but text me Brother Wilhelm, okay? And, all that stuff the abbot was saying about you, it's not true. Alright, Aaron. Let's hear what we had to say.
Pressing play now.
The feast is o'er. Now brimming wine in lordly cup is seen to shine before each eager guest. And silence fills the crowded hall, as deep as when the herald's call thrills in the loyal breast.
Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, an ale husband.
How's it going? I've not had too many. I'm good to podcast.
Give me my mic, man. Come on, I'm good to podcast. No, dude. And as you can tell, today we are going on the lash to explore the wonderful medieval world of drinking alcohol. So as draw, I am already, I've had 2 sips of beer. I'm feeling the effects. As dry January draws to a close, and we move into wet February.
Moist.
I hope this episode can give you some inspiration, because they knew how to do it back then, didn't they?
Yes, and as we all know, medieval people drank alcohol instead of water because water was so dirty. That's a fact. You should now close the episode now and go tell one of your closest, most trusted friends that information.
So, this is the first item of business that we're going to tackle, because you see this one everywhere. I mean,
yes.
Now I think the needle's begun to move a little bit on it. You see more pushback on the internet, but it's still pretty ubiquitous. And the simple truth of the matter is that medieval people drank alcohol because they loved alcohol, okay?
Yeah, well, it's like, there's lots of people who don't drink as much water as they should because they love soft drinks, like this beautiful and fluorescent blue Serbian Fanta.
No, it's
that
Bosnian.
I'm looking at. Sorry. My God. This Bosnian Fanta that we found at the co-op.
Yes.
You can find medieval texts where people are like, and of course, beer is a far finer drink than water. But it's like, I could find texts in my phone that say that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we can't get good water in the UK.
Nor was it historically new in the Middle Ages or geographically sort of peculiar to Europe to drink that much booze. Everyone was boozing in antiquity.
Oh, yeah.
You think the Romans and the ancient Greeks weren't boozing? Oh, they were boozing.
The floor of the Mediterranean, it's just like crushed amphorae, just as far as you can see.
And we know that medieval people, by and large, understood the concept of clean water and where to get it from.
Yeah.
Because we have so many medieval medical texts, such an abundance talking about where to find clean water, why you should make sure your water is clean, when it's important to boil your water, like if you get it from a river, and ranking, like spring water is better than well water, but well water is better than river water. They knew about water, and they had water. I mean, I think if you were in a city, you would probably be drinking like rainwater a lot of the time. And I think definitely
Don't drink from the river.
don't drink from the River Thames. I think they knew that. Boy, whatever is in there boiling is not going to get rid of it.
You like go down to get a pail of water from the River Arno, and then 50 minutes later you look like Violet Beauregard.
Exactly. So you have, and obviously for most of history, even still in the present day, cities were considered to be disgusting places. I mean, London was where they found out what cholera was because of contaminated sewer
so
drinking
much of
water. So I'm not saying that everyone was always getting completely clean water, but they knew what clean water was. And the benefits of alcohol, one, let's talk about them. It's delicious.
Well, sometimes it's disgusting.
So yeah, we will talk about alcohols both delicious and disgusting, but assuming people's standards were lower back then because they didn't have, you couldn't go to your local pub and ask for the newest limited edition small batch like Goblin Flyer Airplane Raid,
Barman, your finest Marjorie.
Yeah, exactly.
You couldn't be the guy. I guess actually, the guy who's like way too into Guinness.
Yeah.
But, yeah, man. Actually, it doesn't travel, so you have to drink it in Temple Bar in Dublin, and you have to pay €10.
And that will be much more true of beer drunk in the year 1200 than it is now. They liked getting drunk.
Yes.
Alcohol is full of calories.
Yes, this is the huge thing.
This is the big one because it's made of grain.
That used to be that used to be a good thing. Now it's a bad thing.
Yep.
But back then, when you were a subsistence peasant, actually being able to drink bread was awesome.
Yeah, they literally called it liquid bread. There was no Miller Lite in the Middle Ages. We're talking about like real soups, beer soups. And it is a good way to preserve wheat because even though the antibacterial properties of alcohol were not like necessary in order to kill germs that were in the water, they were good at keeping the wheat in the beer from going off. And so it was also just a good way to store calories. And you know what? In a life where you're a subsistence farmer and you probably eat like a lot of peas porridge and bread and cheese that like isn't that great, having a beer is nice.
And it also makes life much more exciting.
Yes.
Because it's like, what entertainment have you got? It's like you could watch two bulls run at each other sober, or you could do that drunk.
Oh yeah, you could. I mean, whenever I read about a medieval play where it's like, and then they had a man dressed as, a silly clown, and he was waving around a stick, and everyone was like, this is innovative
this
theater.
Is the coolest thing I've ever fucking...
It's like, yeah, well... It makes me think of when we went to see The Beekeeper, and we were like,
the Jason Statham movie,
The Beekeeper.
And we'd had a few.
No, not an actual beekeeper. No. That I could do so.
That would be we're gonna go down to the pub to see The Beekeeper.
Yeah. He's gonna be there with all of his bees.
The Jason Statham movie, The Beekeeper, and then we may or may not have snuck beverages into the cinema. And we had a religious experience.
Yes.
Around about the time that Jason Statham was like, I've got to protect the hive for the 75th time. For anyone who hasn't seen the Jason Statham movie, The Beekeeper, it's a movie about a man who belongs to a super secret society called the Beekeepers, who are like, super agents. But also, he is a beekeeper. And then you meet other beekeepers over the course of the movie. Because, like, he's a bee, and you think, okay, it's part of the training that you become a beekeeper when you become a beekeeper. And then you meet other beekeepers in the movie, and they're not about bees. They're pretty indifferent to bees.
It's all right. Yeah. So bottom line is, there are so many reasons why people drank alcohol. We don't need to get into that silliness of, they didn't have clean water.
No. Because it was sick. So we're going to be talking about 4 main categories of alcohol. We're going to be talking about beer/ale. We're going to get into that distinction. And we're going to talk about wine. We're going to talk about mead. And we're going to talk about spirits. And we're going to talk about not only how these alcohols were made and consumed, but also some of the kind of cultural connotations associated with them. So let's jump right into the first of these, which is beer/ale. Olivia, what is the difference between beer and ale?
Hops, right?
Well, not now. Now the difference is something much more confusing.
Oh, yeah, I don't know, but in the Middle Ages it was hops,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Yeah, so the ale and lager are the two different kinds of beer that we have now. They're both made with something called hops, which we will get into. They're fermented slightly differently, and so they come out kind of differently, and you should drink them differently. Lager, you have to drink nice and cold. Ale, depending on the ale, can be can be warmer.
It's often just room temperature.
Yeah, and ale is also, it's more culturally more of a British thing, and
It is,
and
yes.
lager is more of a continental thing.
And that holds historically as well.
yes, well,
so
we'll very much get into that.
even though they've both changed quite a bit, going back to the Middle Ages, this divide of, English people drink ale, and Scandinavians as well, historically, versus, prissy continentals drink lager with hops in it is,
This
very
is
much
one
true.
of this is me going to be just now going on a tangent, but I wanted to tell this story. So a couple of years ago, I was on holiday with Joe Mason and a couple of our friends. And I confessed to, in what I thought was a trusted environment, I confessed to Joe Mason and our friends that I did not know the difference between lager and ale. And they just all turned on me and they're like, "What? You don't know the difference? You can't tell the..." And it was in that moment that I had this wonderful, transcendent realization that for the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be mansplained to. For
Yep.
5 minutes, I accessed the divine feminine. It was incredible. I felt like all of my foremothers,
Yeah.
going back thousands of years in the history of fermentation, had their hands on my shoulders, finally, my child, you understand our pain.
No, exactly. And to be fair, the lines are blurred nowadays.
Yes.
But let's get back to the Middle Ages. So.
Yeah, because that categorizing of lager and ale, ale is a term that's used in the Middle Ages. It doesn't mean the same thing that it does now. The distinction was broadly between ale, which was made without hops, and beer, or hoppenbier, which was made with hops. What are hops?
They're like a weird little, I don't even know what type of the plant they are. I guess they're like the flower?
Yes,
I think they are a flower.
They're a bit of flower from the hop plant, I think.
Yeah, it's like a vine. I do see them growing wild along the train tracks in Berlin. I've always wanted to make like a train beer
Der Tränenbier.
that you could drink on the train. They're quite distinctive looking little things, hopses, but I don't really know that much about the brewing process and what they bring to the table.
Well, hops emerge in beer in Germany in the 8th century. It's the first time we get explicit references. Actually, the first explicit reference to hops being used as a flavoring in beer comes from Hildegard von Bingen.
Oh.
Hops are flavoring, but they're also preservatives, and that means that before hops, beer or ale spoils very, very quickly.
And it's not just that it spoils, it keeps fermenting too.
Yes.
So it gets rotten and it gets really alcoholic quite quickly.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what that means for the kind of economy of beers is that in a lot of the world, especially in Britain, ale is a cottage industry. It's produced in the household as part of just making food for the family. And then traditionally, you sell the excess that you don't consume before it goes off. It's a secondary income stream. And what that means is that from a very early stage in the history of beer in Europe, women, because obviously traditionally women are responsible for making sure everybody's fed, women are disproportionately represented in brewing. So the women who sold their beer, actually a lot of them were unmarried. So they wasn't just women who were preparing, it as part of their food for their family. It also just became a thing that women did habitually. These women were called alewives, which is a term that is pretty much only still in use as the name of the Claro song and a station on the MBTA in Boston. Now, these women, in part, I think because the women are disproportionately more likely to be unmarried, there is a general kind of perception that shows up in medieval Christian attitudes to these women that they are sort of temptresses who are going to lead you to bad decision making with their tasty, constantly fermenting beers.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny how I always think that all of the stereotypes that people have that are fake about the Middle Ages, where the whole like, oh, people think if the Middle Ages wrong thing collapses is when it comes to like alcohol and taverns. Because like the image of the busty tavern wench who's
it's
like,
a real type
have
of
another
person.
pint, sir. Yeah, that really was, a real type of person, and more importantly, like a real stereotype that people had of especially working class single women.
Yes. And now, Olivia, I want you to scroll in the notes to the large picture that I've included in this section.
That like jump scared me.
So I've picked a cultural representation of an alewife and sort of a stand-in for how alewives are seen by the church, which is a painted carving that is on the ceiling in Norwich Cathedral.
Aw, Norwich reference. I've probably seen it or at least walked under it.
Yeah. Would you like to describe the scene?
Yeah, so it's all of these like naked. I genuinely thought it was like actual like gore or something when I first laid eyes upon it, and then I realized it's just like a painted kind of boss of 3 figures on this like black background, and they're all naked. And one of them is this frightening demon guy, and he's pushing a cart with like a naked guy who's sort of writhing around in pain, like curled up in a wheelbarrow. And on his back is riding this like naked, long-haired woman, and she's holding a tankard aloft above his head.
So the devil
as if to say, onwards.
Yeah, the devil is driving you to hell.
Yeah.
And spurring him on is the alewife.
Yep.
And also, can I just say, need her.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and people did need her because everyone drank beer in the Middle Ages. Even children were drinking beer. I mean, everyone drank beer. And they had different strengths of beer and ale. So you had what was known as small beer, which was made with the grains.
A few small beers?
A few small beers was, what you would have for breakfast in the Middle Ages with your porridge. And it would be a lower percentage. It would be made, I think, with the grains after they had already been used once to make beer. But then you had other types of beer as well that were stronger, and especially in the evening, you would be drinking what would, be like 5 to 7% alcohol content beer or ale. And everyone was doing this. People consumed a huge amount of beer. So I was reading that monks at the St. Augustine monastery in Canterbury drank 2 gallons of ale a day. That's like 16 pints. These are not fake numbers, I swear to God. And this is corroborated over and over in the medieval world that people are drinking a lot of beer and ale.
And also, it's important that you bring up monks because actually brewing was both beer but also wine was it was a great revenue stream for monasteries as well. And so actually a lot of the centers of brewing, both in the Christian world and also the Muslim world, which we're going to get to, were Christian monasteries.
Yes, because monasteries would have these big land endowments. I mean, especially by the High and the Late Middle Ages, monasteries were basically like autonomous sort of cities in and of themselves almost, and so brewing beer was something that had to be done as a matter of course. Selling the excess beer was something that basically everyone who brewed did, and wine was necessary for the Holy Communion, and so often monasteries would make their own wine. Even in places like England, where we don't think of them as being winemaking regions today, there was a lot of wine production. So in the Doomsday Book, I think there were 40 vineyards that were recorded in England. These might not have been the best wines in the world that were being made, but they did just fine for communion.
Your English piss wine.
I mean, yeah.
That's what they said then.
That was what they said then, and it's what they say now.
But also, important thing to remember is that actually the geography of wine production would have been different in the Middle Ages. This is the medieval warm period. The climate is warmer than it is now, and than it is in the time between now and the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. And so, actually, it was much more viable to have vineyards in sort of southern and central England.
Yes.
But I will say, even in the medieval warm period, England is still at the high end of what you can get away with in terms of, wine-producing regions. It's on the edge of kind of it being viable.
More on that soon.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think whether it was beer or ale that you were drinking, one of the things you have to bear in mind is that these would not have really looked or tasted very much at all like what we drink today. So many things were different. I mean, first of all, even a hobbyist brewer today has more control over the environment that they're making alcohol in than anyone did back then. So just being able to control the temperature and the acidity and like the airflow is a huge improvement on the methods that they had. And so I think a really big one is that you're not making these beers in airtight conditions at all. So like they're not carbonated, they're flat like modern English sort of cask ales. Everything is being made in a cask. Filtration isn't really like introduced very early on at all into the whole process. So you've got like bits. A lot of the beer has bits in it. And you have all of these like hyper regional, like local styles where again, it's basically made and consumed very quickly and in a very short radius of where it's made. And so you have some insane accounts actually in the Middle Ages and shortly thereafter of like the messed up beverages that people were consuming.
Yeah, and one of the main ways in which you would distinguish beers from different regions and different cities is the way that they're flavored. So I mentioned that early Middle Ages hops aren't used. They kind of catch on gradually in Germany and the Netherlands, and then sort of spread. What you use instead as a flavoring agent is something called grout. Now, this is a mix of herbs that are sort of put into the beer to make it taste nice, and each major sort of beer-producing city in the Holy Roman Empire would have had their own recipe for this grout that was a jealously guarded secret, because grout mostly wasn't collected by, like, individual brewers who were going out and foraging from their local area. It was sort of shipped en masse into these sort of institutions called grout houses, which were basically an association of people who had a monopoly by law on the control of the sale and distribution of grout, and it would then be sort of distributed to brewers across the city. And so you would have each city has a very particular recipe. So Köln, for example, now Köln beer is very much a kind of famous thing now, and it was a famous thing back then. Köln beer used bog myrtle, beckeler, juniper berries, anise, kemps, and malts.
Yeah, and
which I actually kind of think
sounds pretty good.
It sounds like a nice gin.
Yeah, and you have a lot of like different botanical ingredients being intruded to the process. So I was reading that they did some filtration through pine boughs, which would have been, I think, quite nice. I do think they were drinking nice beers, but sometimes I think you hear something where it's like, oh my god. So I was reading about something.
I think for every city that has nice beers, then there's like the mutants in the next
the dragon soup. The oldie dragon soup. So the oldie dragon soup in the west of England was something called West Country White Ale. Oh man, so I was reading about West Country White Ale because everyone that went to like in England to Devon or like Cornwall basically came back and wrote like 5 or 6 pages about how bad the beer was. And so that's things you need to know.
It's cider country.
Yeah,
it's not beer country.
No, it's West Country White Ale country. So things you need to know about West Country white beer. First of all, it's white. It's extremely pale.
I got that.
It's also extremely viscous and cloudy. The reason why that is because its ingredients included egg whites and pea flour. Okay?
So it's a white, viscous liquid.
Yes, that's fermented. And drank while it's still fermenting. Now, last thing you need to know about West Country White Ale that everyone said about it was that it makes you shit yourself uncontrollably. So this is someone who wrote, this was in the early 16th century, but someone who wrote about the ale said it is looking white and thick as pigs had wrestled in it. It will make one to cack, also to spew. It is thick and smoky.
Ooh.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the West Countrymen probably had some, like, really robust gut flora, because they were drinking this all the time.
It's not been to Somerset, I can confirm that they definitely do.
And they also had a secret grout that was added to it, but no one ever could figure out what it was. And I believe the secret has, like, died, so we'll never actually know exactly what they were putting in this beer that makes you shit yourself.
Right, lads, we've got to find a way to make this stuff worse.
So, yeah.
I have decided that I think that I can't decide what's funnier. The people were drinking this and be like, "Barman, more of the cum beer."
Oh God, that was what it was like.
Or,
Oh,
or, they were like, "Ear Airy, that lad from Lincolnshire's visiting."
put an egg white in his beer.
You're right, lad.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. And a lot of I read an article, or I read a writing about it as well, by somebody who said that like it's not nutritious because it just passes through you, like your body isn't capable of absorbing it. Which again, it wasn't all that bad, and there were places where they had quite robust industries where they would like filter it and they would add nice botanicals and things to it. But when you went into the countryside, it was anyone's guess what you were going to get served up out there.
I'll have the scrumpy.
Yeah.
I do want to come back to one other thing that I said about hops, which is that they're not just a flavoring, they're a preservative. This is the reason why hops beats grout in the long term, is because it makes it possible for you to store beer for longer, for you to transport beer for longer, and for you to make greater quantities of it at a time. And as a result of this, I don't think it's a coincidence that you look at the proportion of beer kind of producers in a city like Oxford, which has pretty good records for this. The portion of women who are brewing beer in the city goes down precipitously over the 14th, 15th centuries as hops are being introduced, and the trade gets taken over more and more and more by the great men of the city, by the Burgesses. Because like every industry that gets professionalized, it's like, okay, time to get the women out.
Yes.
They had their fun.
In Germany, they have a law called the Reinheitsgebot, which means the purity law. And Germans...
Can I just say, whenever I hear that the Germans have got a purity law, I start to sweat.
And Germans love to bring this up and talk about how they have a law that stipulates that only specific ingredients can be used in beer. I think the original one, which might still be in effect today, which was passed in 1516, was that the only ingredients that could be used in beer were barley, malt, and hops. And I think it was assumed yeast was going to be used anyways. That's not mentioned, but it was used. And Germans like to uphold this as our beer is so good we don't put stuff in it. But this law wasn't passed to improve consumer standards. This was not a consumer protection law. It was passed to prevent competition with bakers for wheat and for other grains that were seen as more desirable. So it was it wasn't made to make beer more pure, but it did have as well a standardizing effect on the beer industry, where then it's well, what's the point of going to your local alewife and getting whatever special concoction she's got? It's all basically going to be the same. And so that had a big effect as well in the Holy Roman Empire. Just no more grout.
Yeah. And no more alewives. Oh yeah, and by the way, before we leave beer, alewives, they weren't witches. Witches aren't based on them. It's not a thing.
Yes.
You find that online. It's not true. I'm not getting into it now.
So, up next, we've got mead.
Of the 4 drinks that we're covering in this episode, this is definitely the one that's these days is the most specialist.
Yes, and much mythologized then as now.
Yeah, absolutely. So mead it's honey wine. It's honey that's been fermented with water. I still don't fully understand how you ferment honey.
I mean, it's the same way you ferment anything else. You put yeast in it.
Oh, it literally is that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway... I'm a dumbass. Anyway, so mead is being drunk all over Europe and the Middle East in the Middle Ages, but really I think it has the most kind of the most cultural centrality in Northern Europe, so in Scandinavia, in England, and in the Celtic world. So mead, one of the great examples of mead sort of as an allegory and as a cultural kind of concept comes from the Prose Edda and the story of the mead of poetry. So in the Prose Edda, a character is asked to explain how the tradition of skaldship and the art of poetry was invented. And so it is explained to them through this story, which I will dip in and out of, because it's quite long. The beginning of this was that the gods had a war with the people that are called Vanir. They agreed to hold a meeting for the purpose of making peace, and they settled their dispute in this way. That they both went to a jar and spit onto it, but at parting the gods, being unwilling to let this mark of peace perish, shaped it into a man whose name was Kvasir, and who was so wise that no one could ask him any question that he could not answer. He travelled much about in the world to teach men wisdom. Once he came to the home of the dwarves Fjalar and Galar. They called him aside, saying they wished to speak with him alone, slew him, and let his blood run into 2 jars called Son and Bodn, and into a kettle called Odrer. They mixed honey with the blood, and thus was produced such mead that whoever drinks from it becomes a skald and a sage. The dwarves told the Aesir that Kvasir had choked in his wisdom, because no one was so wise that he couldn't ask him enough about learning. Anyway, it all gets very Coen Brothers. The dwarves then try and run a scheme on a giant called Gilling, and they fail, he takes their mead, and then Odin then steals the mead of poetry, brings it to Asgard, and he shares it between the Aesir gods and the race of man, and thus the art of poetry was invented.
Yes, so Old Norse poetry and Old English poetry are replete with this beautiful flowery language about drinking and alcohol, and especially mead, we see over and over again in Old Norse poetry. And we've got some kennings, some poetic terms for alcohol and different alcoholic beverages that I wanted to share with you guys.
Yes.
To be honest, I'm not even going to try pronouncing these in Old Norse, but we have alcohol being referred to as the resounding sea of the forehead spears of oxen.
That is how a hangover feels. So that's very appropriate.
That's referring, of course, to alcohol being drunk out of horns. So we've got mead being referred to as the cure of speech, the waterfall of horns, the honey wave.
I love honey wave.
Wine being referred to as the destruction of dignity.
Yep, that tracks.
Ale being referred to as the swamp of malt.
Agreed.
The horn flood. And the drinking horn being referred to as the beer mansion.
That is what I call my flat. And it's not just the Vikings who are all about that mead. Mead comes up in another text that we've talked about quite a lot before, which is the old Welsh poem Ygododden, which is the sort of the story of the battle between the Gododden kingdom of northern Britain and the invading Saxons. And it's a poem about 300 brave Celtic warriors who go to their deaths. And in the lead up to the battle, they drink copious amounts of mead. Mead is, I did a Control F search. Mead is mentioned in this poem, and it is a long poem, but mead is mentioned about 50 times in Ygododden. And one of the many examples of this is, the heroes marched to Catraeth. Loquacious was the host. Blue mead was their liquor, and it proved their poison. Mead is a thing that you drink when you are a cool guy.
Yeah,
it's
that
very
really
butch.
That really is not even the subtext, but the super text. Yes, because in Northern European cultures, you see mead as being emblematic of hospitality, because this is something that's true of all alcoholic drinks, but especially coded in this poetic language in Northern Europe is the role of the chieftain being to be the keeper and the provider in the mead hall. And the mead hall is where all of the local chiefs and the warriors and everyone of importance, any visiting people of importance, come to be entertained and to be given copious amounts of food and drink and a warm reception by whoever is in charge in that area. So we see this in Beowulf as well, of course, where it's also seen, the destruction of the mead hall at the hands of Grendel the monster is seen as, a strike at the very heart of the Danes, and this, horrific sort of encroachment of evil into their people.
And you know what another important part of good hospitality in Northern Europe in the early Middle Ages is? Poetry.
Yes.
And so this is now me putting on my sort of my analysis hat, because obviously asterisk, how much is Snorri Sturluson pulling directly from real traditions 300 years later? We don't know. But you could say that the reason why mead specifically becomes associated in Viking culture with the idea of poetry and skaldship is because when you were consuming mead, it was likely in this space where would you be most likely to hear the great poets of your kingdom? It would be at the mead hall.
Yes, and mead in particular was a luxury beverage.
Mm-hmm.
So, beer, as, all over the place in Europe would have been consumed by your sort of everyman. Honey is quite a sort of, expensive commodity compared to wheat. Wheat is so much cheaper than honey. And so it really would have been a symbol of wealth and a symbol of status to be able to provide so much mead to your guests. And I would also say that these perceptions around mead sort of reinforced and were reinforced by perceptions of bees. So medieval people loved bees, and medieval Northern European people loved bees. There's so many little poems, drawings, and fables written about bees, where bees are the most intelligent of the creatures after people. They have an orderly social structure.
They have bee parliament.
They have a monarch. They what?
They have a bee parliament.
Yeah, they have a bee parliament. They're diligent little workers. And so we also see a lot of culture that evolves around bees. I think I've probably read the Anglo-Saxon Bee Charm, the poem that makes your bees calm down.
The chill out bee. Yeah. The chill out bees poem.
Yeah, and in that one they're called victory women, is the kenning that's used to refer to the bees. So yeah, they are often described as like little Valkyries, and so there is this also poetic language. Just as the warrior. Exactly. Just as the warrior, quaffs his mead before dashing out onto the field, so too does the little warrior of the bee drink the nectar.
And you know what else bees do? Die gloriously in battle.
They do, yeah.
Bees love nothing more than flying up to somebody 1,000 times bigger than them. It's like, I shall die. I may die,
exactly.
But I swear I will inconvenience you for the rest of the week.
So yeah, it was... I think when we talk about mead, I've never actually had mead, but I hear it's often quite dry. So if you're
it's not as sweet as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, that's going to be like honey sort of turned into alcohol. It might not be exactly what you think of, but they did often add fruit and botanical flavorings to that as well. So I think some Viking mead would have been quite nice.
My experience of mead, and it was Ethiopian mead, so it really different. I know. Well, they had mead, but my experience was. It was very dry, but it was also very rich at the same time. It tastes like honey, but it's not sweet. Really interesting. I'm
so intrigued.
We tried to buy mead before this.
Yeah.
By going to your local posh shop.
Yeah.
But they didn't have it.
Ooh, mama.
A few small beers.
A few small beers.
We're done with beers. We're talking about wine now.
All right, so...
Who wants some wine?
Everyone. Everyone wants wine. Not everyone can have it in the Middle Ages.
Yes.
It's a luxury.
Yes, it's expensive. Part of the reason for that is that the Roman Empire ended. It was always a luxury good in the Roman Empire, but Romans had better storage technology. They had those lovely amphorae that seal properly. Mm-hmm. And they also had a much more developed international trade system, so getting stuff from Tuscany to Cornwall was achievable.
Yep.
Whereas it's in the Middle Ages, it's achievable but prohibitively expensive.
Yes.
And so wine, which was already a sort of high status thing, becomes even more of a high status thing.
Yes, and we do have vineyards in, as far north as England and even Denmark, but we also have very good documentation that these were not considered the good wines. And the people living in these places were heavily importing wines, if they could, from all the places that we know and love as wine-producing regions today, like Spain and Italy and, of course, France. So Bordeaux was a big wine-producing region in the Middle Ages. Actually, most of these places were red wine, white wine. They made it all. And so, although everyone was drinking beer, if you were someone who was well off, you were a noble or someone in the growing, middle class, then it would have been seen as good form to just always have a few casks of wine, a few different types of wine, probably imported, in your house, so that anyone who stops by, you can offer them a selection of wines. So in this regard, wine is also very important for hospitality in the Middle Ages. And we see this as well in an account of King Håkon Håkonsson of Norway.
How imaginative.
Yeah, that he throws for his he throws a feast for his son's wedding, and this is in the 13th century, and we hear that he wants to have as much wine as beer there, so that everyone can drink as much of whatever they want.
That's good hosting.
Yes, it is. It is. Actually, the article I was reading about this pointed out that there's very clear differences in what's perceived or emphasized as good hospitality in Scandinavia versus England, because Scandinavians are always talking about the amount of alcohol, and English people will describe in great detail in the Middle Ages the roast meats. So yeah, England, they had the same importance of wine, but also very much a roast culture. Whereas
love a Sunday roast.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas,
That was Thomas Aquinas I was quoting there. Actually, Thomas Aquinas does give us a great quote about wine, which he says that wine does not love man the way that man loves wine.
Yeah, and I think wine really was. It was introduced across Europe, I would say, in the form that we sort of know it, or what would become its current form, by the Romans. So it was also very much, I think, a remnant of the prestige of the Roman Empire, that people in England wanted wine so badly because it was the Romans who brought it there in the first place.
Not that the Romans invented wine, of course.
No.
That was the Georgians. It's true, they did.
Yeah.
And they still make, I'll say it, a fucking good bottle of wine.
They make really good wine. No, but it was, Romans who were the ones that said it. Or English people plant some... No, I don't know why I made that English.
Your Roman accent?
Mamma mia. These are people don't have any grapes. What are we going to drink? No, not the cum beer.
We can't keep going back to cum beer.
I never should have left Tuscany. So...
All right, my lovely.
Would you like 2 egg whites or 3 in your pint?
Anyway, it's so funny. That's what I used to think eggnog was literally that.
I mean, nowadays they put egg whites in cocktails, so has society progressed beyond West Country white ale?
We have turned to cum beer.
I don't know.
Anyway,
in the south of Europe, of course, grapes have a longer growing season, it's warmer, and there's therefore more sugar in the grapes when they're harvested. So this is what makes wine more alcoholic than beer. There's more sugar in grapes in the first place, and that's why you want a nice long warm summer for a really good batch of wine, is you want in the Middle Ages especially, a nice, rich, sort of particularly alcoholic wine.
Nice. Which you would then water down if you weren't an absolute lunatic.
You often would. I mean, I think in the Roman Empire, where drinking wine was on par with drinking beer in terms of volume, it was very, very common, in that you would probably have like half and half or even more water than wine a lot of the time. In the Middle Ages, you did still water it down, but arguably less so. And so these sort of dark, like rich wines were really favored in the Low Countries and in Southern Europe, where they were produced. In England and in Northern Europe, the type of wine that was favored was a type from Bordeaux called claret. So claret was, in the Middle Ages at least, I think in England, I think now claret refers to like a dessert wine, which is why dark red is called claret. But claret means like clear or bright. So medieval claret was a light, somewhat clear red wine. So it was a rosé, essentially, actually. I think nowadays that type of wine is referred to as a rosé. So when we talk about English nobles and Vikings drinking wine, then imagine them with a glass of rosé.
More tavern wench! More rosé! Huzzah! You have to say it back.
Huzzah! Boozy brunch, huzzah! Of course,
My brother Sven requires more mimosas.
of course, wine, like beer, needs to be kept in airtight conditions, or else it's going to start to go off and go sour. And so people took a little bit more care with wine because it was exported all over Europe, but you definitely still had wine that when it got to England or Norway or Sweden, by the time the cask was opened and a glass was poured, it often had gone a bit sour and a bit vinegary.
Yeah, because it's not being stored in airtight amphorae, which is what the Romans did, and that's why you can still drink Roman wine that you find at the bottom of the sea. It's just, it will make you so ill.
I mean, scientists ate like a 50,000-year-old bison, so yeah.
But you can't do that for medieval wine, because medieval wine, it's mostly stored and transported in barrels. And the problem with barrels is that wood is porous. And so you are going to get some level of oxidation. Even worse, the thing that's going to keep even less well is if it's being carried in an animal skin, which is that's more of a last mile kind of thing, but it's still, there's a lot of air contact in that.
Yeah. So you very much can assume that the Vikings, who were pouring out copious quantities of wine, were not always pouring out the best qualities of wine, even though they were very hospitable. And so there were...
Imagine you have an amazing scene of an Italian guy who has to go and treat with a Viking warlord. It's here we have the finest wine. I brought it all the way from your homeland. Huzzah! And he has to pretend it's good.
Mamma mia.
His inner monologue is this shit is off.
Yeah.
But he does not know.
I hear the very best Italian wines are sour.
Huzzah!
Yeah, so you have things that come about as ways to sort of either counteract this or mask this a little bit. So, for instance, adding honey or spices to wine would have been a good way to mask that. So yes, mulled wine in the Middle Ages. I won't go so far as to say that it evolved as a way of hiding off wine, because we also do have quite a bit of evidence that everyone liked mulled wine, and also cold spiced wine. So something that was really popular in the Middle Ages was something called Hippocras, because it was filtered through some kind of system that was, yeah, exactly, it was made out of hippos. And that was a cold spiced wine. And we have records of these types of spiced wines being served in the high courts at all the feasts and the banquets. You would probably have a selection of spiced and non-spiced wines.
Would my lord like more of the horse wine?
Exactly. Bring me more rosé! Huzzah!
Huzzah!
So we have a medieval recipe for Hippocras. It says to make Hippocras for lords, use ginger, cinnamon, and grains of sugar, and
Turf
oil.
That's probably a herb.
Yep, and for common people, ginger, cannelle, long pepper, and clarified honey.
I love the fact they have separate recipes for posh people.
I know.
We don't get the good stuff.
Yeah, but it's great because it goes to show it's being consumed by everyone in society based on what spices they had access to. So yeah, some spiced honeyed wine. Oh,
I would actually fuck that up.
that would have been real nice. It's interesting as well, you see here the coding of honey as being low class.
Yeah.
And sugar as being high class, which very much would have been the case back then because anyone can have bees, whereas sugar is much, much harder to come by.
Also, I remember, this is now just me litigating old arguments, but I remember a couple of Christmases ago when you had some people over and decided to use the most expensive bottle of wine I'd ever bought to make mulled wine, and I was so mad.
And how much did you pay for that bottle of wine?
£10.
10 pounds, ladies and gents, 10 pounds sterling. In fact,
Look, in my mead hall, only the finest. It was actually £10 with a club card discount. Thank you very much.
that's $13.39 at the time of me writing. That's €11.53 for our continentals.
I have since expanded my horizons. What are we going to do? New Zealand?
That's 2,120 Japanese yen. For my Japanese listeners.
Shout out, by the way.
Shout out. Yeah, you guys are great.
You can get the Weird Medieval Guys book in Japanese.
You can.
It looks sick. I'm looking at it right now. Okay, so we got beer, we got wine, we got mead. Spirits. Ooh. I'm drinking a ghost.
So yes, you joke, but that is where the word spirit comes from. It is the spirit of wine, as it were, the essence of wine. So there was a fascinating medieval development or progression towards distilled alcoholic beverages. We don't see them early on in the Middle Ages at all. So alcohol, as you may know, is an Arabic word. It's actually a doublet of the word kohl, so the black stuff you put around your eyes like ancient Egyptians would do. So this is a testament to the fact that Muslims did a lot of pioneering work towards distillation in the Middle Ages. That doesn't mean that they were drinking vodka or actually consuming what they had distilled, or that they were distilling specifically or exclusively alcohol. I don't think there's any evidence that they were doing vodka shots, unfortunately, in the Muslim Golden Age.
I think some of them probably had the idea at some point. And then immediately regretted it.
They did use the extraction process of distillation to create perfumes and topical medicines. Of course, they did have some writings, which we will get into more later, about alcohol and its consumption. So, for instance, Avicenna, who we've talked about, wrote about how he viewed wine as medicinal. Again, we'll get more into that later, but that reflected a broader idea in the Middle Ages that alcohol was medicinal.
Well, medicinal alcohol is a thing. I'm sure they mean the exact same thing that means.
So, of course, in the Middle Ages, the dominant medical theory was what we call humoral theory. So it's the idea that we got from the ancient Greeks. Thank you, ancient Greeks. None of this was correct in the end. The ancient Greeks, they gave us basically everything. They gave us philosophy. They gave us mathematics. And I think at some point we just stopped double checking. We were like, probably everything the Greeks gave us is fine. And that was when they gave us humoral theory. But it was this idea that your body is regulated and regulates 4 main fluids. And the fluids are yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. And everyone naturally has a different sort of proportion of each of these ingredients, so to speak. So every human being is like a cocktail of all these different gunks.
I, for example, am 82% phlegm.
And so each of these humors, as they were called, was associated with a different trait. So like black bile was melancholy. Melancholy means black bile. So if you had a lot of black bile, which black bile doesn't exist, by the way, it meant you were a melancholic person. And so the best humor was sanguine, so blood. So we called cheerful people sanguine, and being dominated by this humor was seen to be a good thing. It meant that you were lively and cheerful and energetic. And we also had ideas of the sort of properties of each of these humors. They were associated with different planets, and they also had different characteristics. So like melancholy, I think, was like dry and cold, whereas sanguine was hot and wet.
Hell yeah.
So, the idea was
that's a powerful combination.
And you see this in medical texts as well, sort of dividing people along gendered lines, because the idea was that people thought that men naturally ran at a hotter temperature, and that, like, the male body was just naturally hotter and wetter somehow than the female body.
Women be loving blankets.
Yeah.
I believe it.
I mean, actually, you know what?
Women be cold.
You're kind of right. But anyways, so alcohol, which is wet and may not be intrinsically hot, but you feel all warm and toasty when you drink it, was often seen as promoting good health and a good balance of the humors. So this is why they were always like bloodletting or trying to do various things, making people throw up in the Middle Ages and beyond, was to rebalance your humors. But anyways, so later on in the Middle Ages, we do see all of this distilling technology making its way throughout Europe in service of creating distilled ethanol to be drunk by human beings. And so these alcohols were often called aqua vitae, or aqua vita, the water of life in Latin.
Yeah.
So this term was used by the alchemist John of Rupecissa, a 14th century alchemist, And he was one of the main guys that brought distillation to Europe and sort of solidified the status of spirits as really important in Europe.
And of course, the water of life is still used to refer to
whiskey. So
Yes.
that aquavita in Gaelic, it was like whiskey vita or something. So it's not only is it a translation, but the words are also etymologically connected to each other. So he was an alchemist, and one of the focuses of medieval alchemy was the search for the fifth element. Do you know
Not
what the
the
fifth
movie.
element? No, not the. I haven't
Not the
seen the
Luc
movie,
Besson
so I
movie.
actually don't know what the fifth element is in the movie.
Gary Oldman has a terrible hair. I think the fifth element is a baddie. That's what the movie's about. Which, honestly, I get
It's
it.
not a baddie in medieval alchemy. The fifth element is ether, so it's the element that exists in the cosmos, and so it's like what this divine spheres are made out of. And so in Latin,
Planet of alcohol.
yeah, booze planet.
I would be like Wallace from Wallace and Gromit's Grand Day Out.
Oh yeah, take me to booze planet. So in Latin, the fifth element is quinta essentia, so the quintessence. When we refer to things being quintessential, we are referring to the theoretical fifth element, which was supposedly the element that the planets and the stars and the spheres are all made out of, and it's more perfect and incorruptible and unchangeable and eternal and blah 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 compared to the elements on Earth, which are much more temporal, as it were. And so, of course, the idea was that this was an extremely pure element. It had overlaps then with the medieval concept of the elixir of life. So there was the idea that if we could isolate this quintessence, then it would maybe be some kind of cure to every disease. And the reason why, by the way, scientists or alchemists thought they could find the fifth element was because they thought that it did exist in trace amounts on Earth. So the Greeks were the ones that came up with this theory of a fifth element. But medieval people were the ones who said, well, since the stars and the planets, which are made of quintessence, clearly have an effect on life on Earth, it must be because there's also quintessence present on Earth.
As an extrapolation, makes sense.
It's not bad, but they didn't know like what they were looking for. But in classic medieval alchemical fashion, they just set about doing a lot of science experiments, thinking, you know what, we'll know it when we find it.
It'll look really cool.
Yeah. And, you know, they ended up inventing alcoholic spirits, so...
Got pretty close.
Yeah, and so because the point of distillation is to derive more concentrated alcohol from more dilute alcohol, or more concentrated substances from more dilute substances in general, alchemists thought that distillation was maybe the way that we would find the quintessence. We would have to extract it from something on Earth using this process. And so when this was done to alcohol by John of Rupasissa, who used wine and then distilled it into stronger liquor, he noted the fact that these super concentrated ethanol solutions, I think at this point it was possible to get ethanol to a strength of like 90%, so really strong. He noted that you could actually use this substance, this spirit of wine, as it were, to preserve all sorts of things that would otherwise go off. So you could infuse this alcohol with, for instance, plant flavorings, or use it to preserve organic material.
And permanence
Yes.
is a big part of what medieval people thought they were looking for.
Yes, exactly, because the fifth element is the celestial element. It's eternal, it's pure, it's incorruptible. So there was a lot of excitement about this, and he did tout this as the quintessence that he had been looking for. And as well, if you drink a shot of extremely strong alcohol, you will feel it warm your body.
You will definitely be preserved
Yes.
for all time.
So he was a really big evangelist for the healing properties of these spirits, as he called them, or the quintessence. He was actually imprisoned for unrelated reasons, and when he got out, he wrote about how, like, spirits were the only thing that could keep me going. These really are a miracle substance.
Did his imprisonment perhaps have anything to do with his miracle substance?
No, he was just one of those guys that thought that, like, the church shouldn't have too many diamonds or whatever. So, yeah, he wrote about the benefits in his book on the consideration of quintessence. So he wrote, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because it's a Middle English version. And in this wise, take all comfortative medicines and put them with quintessence, and it shall be 100-fold better comfortative than it was before in all acts and properties. So any medicine that you're taking, put it in a shot of vodka first, basically. He refers to like the quantity of like a nutshell over and over again. So it is like a shot, basically. He says, oh, you should just take a shot in the morning and one at night. And then he said, the same in medicines laxative, for they shall work wonderfully in kind, and their virtues shall greatly be increased of the highest of God, as I shall teach thee hereafter. And if thou put all spices and all sweet smelling and odorous savours within quintessence, thou shalt have so great sweetness that it wonder it is to see.
That is how I feel about gin.
The same of sour things, that is to say, drinks made new of fruit, as wine, cider, or perry, new made, and such others. So he's saying, like, put some mixers in your alcohol, you know? Put some apple juice in, etc. So he talks about all the things you can put in alcohol and how it's basically just always a good idea. And he has a lot of recipes. Some of them include mercury, which probably would have been less
Yeah, see, I'm
yummy.
starting to see the problem.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I think the jury is still somewhat out on how bad it is for you actually to drink straight mercury. Because I was sort of reading like, oh, wouldn't this have been absolutely catastrophic, just telling people to drink mercury? And I think it would have been for the most part. I think people have died from this, but I did find a really good article titled simply, "A 3-year-old male child ingested approximately 750 grams of elemental mercury." And the conclusion of the paper, I mean, the paper was really funny because it was basically just, this happened, but he's fine.
What can we learn from this?
He's fine. There were no side effects whatsoever.
This kid is built different.
Yeah. I mean, mercury is really dense, so 750 grams, that's like 50 milliliters or something. So it is like a shot, a double shot of mercury, which is still, I think, was maybe one of the highest mercury consumptions ever recorded.
Shots.
So there were obviously the medicinal benefits that were being touted, but of course there was also very quickly a recreational element that was introduced into the consumption of spirits. So pretty quickly we see hard liquor established as a type of drink that is widespread in Europe.
Yes, which leads to the invention of whiskey sometime in the late Middle Ages.
Yep.
Get to the punchline.
Yes, so we have a record, for instance, in the 15th century of an Irish chieftain dying from an overconsumption of whiskey, and the record says, Richard or Risdard McGrannell, chieftain of Mointir Eolas, don't know how to pronounce that, died at Christmas by taking a surfeit of aquavita, to him aqua mortis.
Get done, idiot.
Yeah.
Get wrecked. Couldn't handle his bevy.
No Norman warrior would shun jeopardy. Roland's great spirit looks down.
So that is a sort of quick summary of the different alcohols that people were drinking in the Middle Ages. But I think it's actually like we wouldn't be doing our jobs properly if we didn't kind of acknowledge there is a cultural reaction to people getting fucked up all the time, as there is now. And to put it gently, in Christianity and Islam, it's very much frowned upon to get drunk. But the ways in which that is regulated, and then the ways in which that regulation influences the culture around alcohol, is very different in Christianity and Islam. So Christianity, first of all, you can't really ban wine, first of all.
No.
It's sort of important. I don't know if you guys know about this.
Yeah.
It's textually quite important.
I think people do tend to get a little bit confused about how much the church was all in on alcohol in the Middle Ages, but it's not the only thing that you're supposed to consume in moderation.
Yeah.
There's also food.
Yeah.
And so there's a similar doctrine around food. There's a general idea amongst medieval Christians that overconsumption is one of the worst evils, but that doesn't mean that moderation is bad. So God gave us alcohol. Alcohol is part of the sacramental process, and overconsuming is bad, but, you know, So is under-consuming. Now,
It's like
consuming just the right amount.
Yeah,
That's
the
what
sweet
God
spot.
wants you to do.
It's like eating too much cheese.
Yes. Well, not even cheese has enough cheese.
Yeah, that's true. You do not get enough cheese per cheese.
I know.
I wish all of my cheese had more cheese in it. So, there's a great poem that I want to read in full by Oswald von Wolkenstein, who was a Tyrolean poet and diplomat, about the different ways people behave when they are drunk. It's called the 12 Kinds of Drunks. And as you're listening to this, I want you to check off in your head which one is literally you.
Tag yourself.
Yes.
No, don't check it off in your head. Drop it in the comments.
Yes, drop it in the comments. Engagement.
Yes.
Engagement farming.
Engage with us.
And Olivia, when I get to the end of this, I want you to tell me which one was you.
Okay.
So this is the poem. Often, a person believes himself to be so wise, and believes to gain the highest fame thereby, when the juice of the grapes has affected him negatively. The next one believes he is so rich that even the emperor might not be an equal to him. The third appears like an extremely hungry horse, so no one can push enough of fresh or rotten food into the ever-open mouth. The fourth one screams cries over his heavy sins, and his heart is passionately in flames out of deep repentance for strange reasons that no one can comprehend. Sorry, I had to get to the end of that because I really love that line.
Yeah.
That's so true. That last one, by the way, that one is Joe. That's Joe Mason. Anyway, the fifth one desires to do unchaste actions, to which he is dedicated day and night, once he has become addicted to the power of wine. The sixth has a miserable practice. He condemns the soul through false oath so that she will be entirely exhausted when facing God. The seventh is ready to fight. He growls like a dog, held by a chain, and who barks all the time. Its round head is ready for a fight. The eighth becomes so happy out of drunkenness that he is ready to sell his honor, property, wife, and children. The evilness of drunkenness shows in him. The ninth helplessly becomes crazy. Everything what he knows, sees, or hears, he presents openly to everyone. The 10th fights against sleep. That's you. The 11th sings wild songs and screams totally uninhibited both in the evening and in the morning. The 12th becomes so drunk from heavy drinking that he feels alcohol already at the top portion of his throat and voluntarily pays a tribute to the innkeeper.
Oh my god, what a crew.
I feel deep kinship with the 11th, the one who sings totally uninhibitedly both in the evening and the morning.
Yes.
I'd be texting some weird shit to people.
I know. No, I would say I identify with the 11th. I mean, you've seen me get pretty jolly when drunk. I would say more than anything, I identify the most with the third, because after I have a few drinks, the one who appears like an extremely hungry horse. Once I have a few drinks, once there's a certain amount of alcohol consumed, a kebab is like non-negotiable.
Oh. So, obviously, we've been talking up to this point about alcohol in the Islamic world, but those of you who know literally anything, or to the extent that you've even looked at a globe, have figured out that alcohol is a big no-no in Islam traditionally. Now, even that is being a bit of a generalization, because the question of what is the role of intoxicating fermented drinks in Islam and Islamic society is a big... It's a bit of a question mark.
And in the early Middle Ages, it was quite an open question because the Quran and I think several hadiths specifically forbid intoxicating substances.
Yes. So I've got the exact Quranic verse that everybody cites. Mm-hmm. It is, "O you who believe," so that's Muslims, "intoxicants and gambling," and they also list some other stuff, "are an abomination of Satan's handiwork. So avoid that in order that you may be successful."
Yes, so it seems straightforward, but what is an intoxicant? This is the question that Muslims were trying to answer for a lot of the early centuries, the first centuries that Islam existed. And so you had different schools of Muslim jurisprudence, so essentially of Muslim canonical law that interpreted the scriptures and Muslim tenets differently. So one of the early schools that emerged was the Hanafi school, and they had a much more lax view of like what is an intoxicant than a lot of other schools of thought did. So especially because the Quran only mentions 2 substances specifically, which I think is grape wine and date wine.
Yes,
this
and
was
those are not necessarily this reference I think is worth reading in full because it's not negative. It says, "Of the fruits of the date palm and grapes, whence ye derive strong drink and good nourishment, is healing for mankind."
Yes.
So what the fuck does this mean?
Yeah, and it's also like there's a question of when they say like liqueur, do they mean just like, essence? Do they mean juice? Do they mean alcoholic drinks? Yeah, so the Hanafi school, which was and still mostly is the dominant school of thought in Anatolia, the Levant, Egypt, Iraq, Central Asia, places where culturally, even today, there is a somewhat more lax view taken towards alcohol. These were the people who sort of formulated the idea early on that, first of all, it's maybe just restricted to grape and date wine. Other kinds of alcohol are probably fine. Or maybe it's just that it's not supposed to be fermented for that long, but you could ferment it to get as much alcohol as you could within 3 days.
Yes, 3 days was generally seen as the cutoff. But the other thing is that the oldest Arabic language Iraqi cookbook has like 16 recipes for alcohol,
Yeah.
all of which require fermentation for longer than 3 days.
Yes, exactly. And it was another argument that actually alcohol itself was not haram, but only getting drunk.
Because if you were going to do a sort of close reading of that Quranic verse, you would say that the point that, yes, you could literally read it as alcohol is the work of Satan, or you could say alcohol and things like it might entice you to do the work of Satan.
So from maybe the 12th century to about the 14th century, there were quite a few restrictions imposed by the Hanafis until by around the 14th century, they had kind of all come to the conclusion that alcohol was generally forbidden. So up until that point, it had been okay, it had been controversial, but on paper allowed to drink alcohol, basically, in Muslim countries where this was the dominant school of thought.
But it was also, it's important to note that whilst consuming alcohol was permissible most of the time, most people and most rulers did also kind of draw the line at, you probably shouldn't run a tavern, though, should you?
Yeah, no, we'll leave that to the Jews and the Christians.
Well, this is what I was going to say, is that actually this is where Jews and Christians come in. And so wine is predominantly produced and predominantly sold by Jews and Christians. You remember, there are lots of Jews and Christians living in the Middle East, because that is where both of those religions are from.
Yes.
And under Sharia law, Muslim rulers are required to allow those cultures and those religions to continue to pursue their own religious laws, as long as it doesn't sort of conflict with the ability of Muslims to lead an Islamic life.
Exactly.
No, there weren't crackdowns. There were plenty of them.
Yeah.
And plenty, like, individual rulers would ban alcohol and, like, order monasteries to destroy their vineyards or whatever. But, like, the general trend is, it's frowned upon, it's not for polite society.
Yes.
But also polite society is doing it.
It is funny when you have these records of like, oh, this despotic ruler publicly destroyed the royal, leaders, like 5,000 liters of wine or what. It's like, he had 5,000 liters of wine? That's crazy.
How did you get that? And I think that basically, if I was going to sort of summarize the Islamic position on alcohol in the Middle Ages, it is a combination of sort of encouraged ambiguity on the one hand, and then massive hypocrisy on the other hand.
Because, the same people that are writing the Muslim laws about what's allowed are often the people that are indulging in a little bit of beverage from time to time.
Well, we have a great poem about the hypocrisy of alcohol consumption from the Arabic poet Al-Masudi in the 10th century, who gives us these lines. I know that the wine which I drink is forbidden, but I beg forgiveness of God, because he is kind and forgiving. Those who drink grape liquor, claiming that it is lawful, and therefore the wretched commit a double sin. So basically he's saying, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not a fucking idiot. I know the Quran says don't do this.
I mean, he's literally saying it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. Yeah, and Rumi, one of the most well-known Persian poets, who I believe was he 14th century, I think?
Rumi's 14th century,
so
early 14th century.
Well after, alcohol has become much more openly taboo, writes extensively about drinking wine. And he was a Hanafi jurist, so he was probably one of those people, all the jurists would get together and say, oh, this Muslim guy has a vineyard, should we shut it down? They would all say, yeah, definitely. And then they would all go home and have a drink.
To the local Jewish tavern
Yes.
with you. It's interesting you bring up Rumi, because Rumi is emblematic of a tradition within Islam that where wine actually as a symbol is incredibly important, and this is Sufi poetry. So who are the Sufis, Olivia?
I don't fully understand myself.
I don't think they know. It's a tradition of Islamic mysticism that emerges in medieval Persia. So this is a poem by Rumi, translated into English, obviously, because it's written in medieval Persian, but translated into English, called The Many Wines. God has given us a dark wine, so potent that drinking it, we leave the two worlds. God has put into the form of hashish a power to deliver the taster from self-consciousness. God has made sleep so that it erases every thought. God made Majnun love Layla so much that just her dog would cause confusion in him. There are thousands of wines that can take over our minds. Don't think all ecstasies are the same. Jesus was lost in his love for God. His donkey was drunk with barley. Drink from the presence of saints, not from those other jars. Every object, every being is a jar full of delight. Be a connoisseur and taste with caution. Any wine will get you high. Judge like a king and choose the purest, the ones unadulterated with fear, or some urgency about what's needed. Drink the wine that moves you, as a camel moves when it's been untied and it's just ambling about.
Whoa.
That's why he's the GOAT!
He's our goat. That's bestie.
Yes. Now, there's a couple things that I want to point out here. One of them is probably niggling at the back of your mind and you can't quite put a name to it yet. We're going to get to it. The first of these is the point that he's making, which is there are many wines. Wine here is a substitute for intoxication with anything. So Layla and Majnun is a early medieval Arabic epic poem about a guy who is in love with a woman. There's a bit of Romeo and Juliet about it. They both die. And Majnun, literally, it's not his name. It literally just means down bad. So what he's saying is there are many things that can drive you to madness. Pick the thing that is noble, but also pick the thing that speaks to you on some deeper level, not the thing that... Don't choose things because you feel like you should. And that is a very powerful idea, and I quite like that.
Yeah, me too.
And I think that even if we took it literally as a parable about love... That's a very beautiful statement about love. But also he's not just talking about love. He's talking about love. He's talking about sensuality. He's talking about drugs. He's talking about wine. The other thing, the thing that is like, if you read it, you're like, that feels out of place. Is there a word in that poem that you felt, a word that you don't hear very often associated with Islam? Saints.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so saints is very obviously not from the original Persian. Islam doesn't have saints in the same way that Christianity does.
No, sir.
And this is an example of the translator kind of betraying their hand a little bit.
Yes, so Sufi poetry is replete with these references to wine and intoxication. And as we've already said before, we can be pretty certain that people in Persia and Iraq in the Middle Ages, who were part of the, upper class, the intellectual class, were drinking wine. Nevertheless, I think some things to the untrained ear or eye can sound really transgressive about Sufi poetry in ways that have been sort of applied or projected onto that poetry through the layers and layers of cultural transmission and translation that they've been through to get those poems to us today. Because there is this incredibly complex poetic tradition in medieval Persia and the medieval Muslim worlds, this Sufi tradition. And I would go so far as to say that I don't think we have a good contemporary treatment of this poetry. I mean, I've heard a lot of people...
Certainly not a canonical one.
No, definitely not. And I've heard or read a lot of Persian people saying that to date there has been no definitive or good or, sort of all-encompassing translation and exploration of these poems and their themes because they're very richly layered with symbolism. The language is very complex. There is a poetic register that they're written in that cannot really be translated to English directly. And so we always do need to take these translations with a grain of salt. And I wanted to bring this up because I really do recommend that you read some Sufi poetry because a lot of it is really marvelous. But you do have to be aware of which translation you choose. And I think that especially, in light of political situations in Iran and in Iraq and the social tensions that are there now, it's easy, especially as Westerners, to project our feelings about the people who live there now onto the past and say, oh, these people were Rumi was completely licentious. He just, drank all the time. Because there are so many poems that are written in favor of wine and written sort of praising a lover or a glass of wine or a cupbearer. And this dates, the tradition of looking at Persian poetry through this lens goes back quite a long ways in the West. So we get a lot of what are circulated online as kind of just canonical translations of Persian poems. A lot of the time the translator isn't even mentioned. It's just that, oh, this is a poem by Rumi or by Hafiz, who was another very famous Persian poet of that day. And we're never really given the context that this has been translated and editorialized, despite the fact that a lot of these translations are actually 100 or more years old, and our relationship with those texts has changed and with those cultures has changed since then. So especially the poetry of Hafiz, who was quite a transgressive figure in Sufi poetry, I think has been done a little bit dirty because we have this complex relationship of symbols, wine and desire and lovers and cupbearers. And, I don't mean to say that the people who wrote about these things were never literal and were never drinking, but...
Well, it's literal, and then there's also which is why I wanted to start with the Rumi poem.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of that poem is literally pointing out the fact that wine is standing in for... Yes, literal wine. Yes, sensuality.
Yeah.
But also other things.
Yeah, because... And the ambiguity of the language was also part of these complex linguistic games the poets were playing. So they also are probably laughing at us from beyond the grave, saying, these guys are still arguing about it. We pulled a good one on them. But we really see all of this coalesce, I would say, around the end of the 19th century, when we have this movement of sort of aesthetes in Europe who are getting really into a little thing called Orientalism.
By aesthetes, by the way, we mean essentially emaciated white boys who go to the Middle East.
We mean Oscar Wilde and co, basically. Man.
A bunch of people who could be convincingly played by Timothée Chalamet now.
Exactly, yeah, because, it used to be the thing in Europe that when you came of age, you'd go to Italy. Now that's boring, so you have to get really into Persia or India. And so
I would never do a thing like this.
White boys today
would never pick a Middle Eastern country to be have an unhealthy relationship with. Anyway, have I told you about my opinions about modern Turkish politics? Yes, I know Turkey's not a Middle Eastern country. Turkish people, I've been yelled at by enough Turkish people about this. I fucking know.
Turkey is my favorite Arab nation.
Get in.
Anyways, so all of this Sufi mystic poetry, which is of course filled with these references to wine and love and all of these quite daring topics, made a really great vehicle for Orientalism, because all these young men looked at these poems and thought, oh my god, he's just like me.
Which is, to be fair, look...
We've made no progress.
Well, my relationship with Rumi is that I was, and this is not a joke, in Glastonbury, which is like the center.
That's
if you
where
don't
Rumi
know,
is from.
shut up. Which is like in the UK is the proverbial mecca of woo woo spiritualist nonsense. And I read a Rumi poem, and I was like, wow, he is literally me.
And so there's this huge wave of interest in all of this Persian poetry that was founded on pretty shaky ground from the get-go, because it began with the Rubat of Omar Khayyam, which Omar Khayyam probably didn't write any of those poems, or at least not most of them. And that was something that was really huge in the West. And then soon people began to look at the other canonical poets of the Sufi medieval tradition. Hafiz was one of them, Rumi was another one, and there was very much a quest to find the canonical and the definitive translation into English of these poems. So there were different schools of thought, of course, as there always are in translation. Translation is very controversial. Translation of poetry is super controversial. So the first sort of wave, or one of the first waves, was a very literalist, somewhat sort of orthodox approach. And this is quite well exemplified by a man named Henry Wilberforce Clark, who was a scholar of Persian, of the Persian language, and who wrote an 1891 edition of translations of Hafiz that are, it's like 600 pages long, and it's like not that many poems. It's like fewer than 100 poems or something. And he has all of these references. He each page basically has more footnotes than actual sort of lines of translation, and he's very, very thorough about including sort of every possible interpretation of all the ambiguity.
So Wilberforce gives us his, so I'm going to read from his sort of translation of Ode 44. It's a poem about, well, question mark, but it's also, poem wine's in it. We can definitely say that. The word wine is used. And I'll read it in full, his translation. Tress disheveled, sweat expressed, lip laughing, intoxicated, garment rent, song singing, goblet in his hand. I, contest seeking, lip lamenting, came at midnight last night to my pillow, sate. To my ear he brought his head, in a low, soft voice said, "O my distraught lover, sleep is thine." Of whatever he poured into our cup, we have drunk whatever it be of the wine of paradise, or of the cup of intoxication. That Arif, to whom they give wine like this, night watching, is infidel to love, if he be not wine worshipper. O Zahid, go, seize not a small matter against the drinkers of wine dregs, for save this gift, naught they did give us on the day of Alast. The laughter of the cup of wine, and the not-ceasing tress of the beloved, O many a repentance, hath it shattered like the repentance of Hafiz. So this is very abstract. Yes. And in terms of plot, we basically have a guy, and then a quote-unquote lover appears offering wine. That's all that we can say definitively. Wilberforce offers lots of interpretations that I didn't read there, in quotation marks, about what this means. So he, the lover who arrives, Wilberforce puts in brackets God. That's his editorializing. If we took that as true, we would say, here is God offering the wine of paradise.
And this is all Wilberforce's interpretations are based on his familiarity with the Sufi poetic canon. And so he is very much picking up on coded language in these poems, but you could very much say that there is still an element of ambiguity that's been introduced by the poet, and they're choosing to walk the line between using the wine as a metaphor for the sensuous and the spiritual.
Well, it starts in a deeply sensual way.
Yes.
We have, tress disheveled, sweat expressed, lip laughing, intoxicated,
Yes.
deeply horny. You could read it that way anyway. But, like, I think you're absolutely right there, where even in this translation, that kind of ambiguity is made pretty explicit by the line, whether it be of the wine of paradise or of the cup of intoxication.
Yeah.
So this is already, by the way, and this being a quite literal translation, this is already very transgressive, because you're equating God and the intoxicating power of religious faith with intoxication,
Yeah.
which God says no.
Yes.
Remember that that the Quran doesn't have human editorializing in it. According to Islam, the Quran is the word of God.
Yes. So these translations, I mean, they're probably the most detailed and some of the most comprehensive and definitive ever to have been made in English of Sufi poetry, which is quite sad that we haven't been able to update this for 130 years. But we have seen other approaches surface. So another one that came out around the same time was that of a man named John Payne, who was a little bit more attentive when it came to verse and flow. So here's his rendering of the same poem.
Flask in hand and verse reciting, warm with wine and laughing-eyed, all a sweat with hair disheveled, raiment rent and shift awry, her Narcissus eyes strife seeking, and her lip a frolicking, yester midnight to my pillow came, and sat she by my side. To my ear she bended, and with soft complaining voice, Sleepest thou, O ancient lover mine, or dost thou wake, she sighed. What she poured into our goblet that we quaffed, unheeding if with the toper's wine she served us, or with heaven's nectar implied. If unto a sage a night draught, such as this, the fates vouchsafe, infidel to love the man were, who to worship wine denied. So, okay, two things have carried over here. Number one, we have the lover arrives and pours the wine, and that wine is sort of ambiguous as to what it is. And the other thing is we have the idea of the infidel to love.
Yes.
You know, if you're not intoxicated by love, you don't really believe in it.
Yes.
But have you picked up on the major linguistic shift that has happened here?
I'm noticing some different pronouns.
Yes! So the lover in the first version of the poem is not gendered.
Yes.
And in fact, Wilberforce offers God as an explanation, who is traditionally in Islamic writing is male.
Yeah, and he quite deliberately capitalizes the word he.
Yes. Whereas now the lover is implied to be a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
What could be happening with that shift? Could it be that the author wants this? Wants this to be the interpretation?
Even though the second one that we read might sound like it's taken more liberties with the language and the interpretation, to the sort of Orientalists and the young socialites of the very end of the 19th century, these both sounded really dry and bland.
Well, because one of the core things about Orientalism, the thing that sort of distinguishes it from other kinds of, like, racial prejudice, is that it's deeply sensual. It's all about a combination of, like, abstract religious enlightenment and physical pleasure. And how can you, if you're an impressionable young white boy in Persia, how can you represent sensuality and pleasure if not as a beautiful woman pouring you a glass of wine? So we have a final translation.
And this, if you look up this poem, is the translation that will fill the first 2 or 3 pages
Yes.
of Google results. And you'll never find anyone questioning whether or not this translation is good, whether or not it reflects the words of the original author. You'll find people, even like I found websites for college sort of undergraduate poetry courses, analyzing this as if these were the words of Hafiz the poet. Instead, they're the words of Richard Le Galliard, who was a man who was a lover of Oscar Wilde's and a prolific publisher of his versions of Persian poems. He didn't speak Persian, but he read Wilberforce Clark and Payne's versions and basically thought, well, these aren't that nice. And Persian poetry is supposed to be sensual. And it's supposed to be really fun and frolicsome and sexy. And these guys didn't make it sexy at all. And even though, this person who wrote this lived 500 years ago, they were trying to be a bit sexy. So let's get a bit sexy with it.
Yeah. Let's hear a sexy poem. And once again, I want you all at home to play the game of what's changed here in this chain of translation. Last night, as half asleep I dreaming lay, half naked she came in her little shift, with tilted glass and verses on her lips. Narcissus eyes, all shining for the fray, filled of frolic to her wine-red lips. Warm as a dewy rose, sudden she slips into my bed, just her little shift. Said she, half naked, half asleep, half heard, with a soft sigh betwixt each lazy word, "O my old lover, do you sleep or wake?" An instant I sat upright for her sake, and drank whatever wine she poured for me, wine of the tavern, or vintage it might be of heaven's own wine. He surely were a curl who refused wine poured out by such a girl. A double traitor he to wine and love. Go to, thou Puritan, the gods above, ordained this wine for us, but not for thee. Drunkards we are by divine decree, yea, by the special privilege of heaven, foredoomed to drink, and foreordained forgiven. Ah, Hafiz, you are not the only man who promised penitence and broke down after. For who can keep such hard a promise, man, with wine and woman brimming over with laughter? O knotted locks filled like a flower with scent, how have you ravished this poor penitent? Okay, so, first thing you notice is this is about 5 times longer.
Yes, and something that's important to understanding that is the fact that Richard Le Galliard did not speak Persian. So he thought that actually, in fact, he writes this in the preface of his book of translations, that actually as someone who's not a scholar, who's concerned with the grammar and the word-for-word accuracy, that actually he was much better placed than the scholars of the Persian language to provide a rendition, because
the people of Persia have had enough of experts.
Yeah, exactly. He could tap into the spirit of the poetry, which of course is a sexy woman. So even though
we've gone from God to what if a hot woman got into bed with you and gave you some wine.
I mean, yes, he repeats the fact that she's half naked like 3 or 4 times.
There's like the little shift.
Yes.
Which is, this is the other thing about the original, well, quote unquote, the original translation, is that the physical descriptions are not there. There's very little physical description. It's more about the ideas. This is just, this one is much more visually evocative. You can picture the scene very easily, but that's because he's made all of these descriptive decisions that are not there in the other translations.
Yes, and even, from the first 2 lines of the Wilberforce Clark poem, or the first 2 couplets, there is actually a sort of tension between, like, this theoretical lover figure who is, eye is contest seeking, lip is lamenting, garments are rent, which actually...
Garments are rent is very sexy.
It's sexy, but it also alludes somewhat to, like, grief, because that was what women of the Levant would do in states of grief, was rend their garments. And so there's a tension between that and the sort of intoxication and the joy that's being expressed, and a lot of that is just gone. So it's quite funny. Richard Le Galliard was quite keen to make a name for himself as, the author of the definitive versions of these poems, which is, it's very ambitious, again, considering that he didn't speak Persian. These were very successful. They played so well into the Orientalism of the age that people loved them, and he toured all over the place. He toured America.
Because Iran is full of sexy, sexy, swarthy women who will pour you wine and sort of, oh, my lover, oh.
Yes, exactly. And he very much identified himself with the characters of these poets.
Oh, really? What could possibly give you that impression?
Even a lot of contemporary reviewers were quite quick to pick up on the fact that Le Galliard was reveling in sort of how vulgar he was making these things. And I read a good article talking about this a little bit more, where he talked about the fact that he would give these public speeches and public renditions of these poems, often to audiences of mostly women who are sort of swooning over him.
You know what? I like him again, actually. I've come all the way around.
And he refused to address the matter really, apart from in the preface of this book, as to whether or not he was really to be trusted as a translator.
Now, do I speak Persian? No.
Do I love wine and women?
Yes.
Yes.
And also men, but we're not going to get into that. Mm-hmm. You guys don't need to worry about that one.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we won't even get really into, like, the gender ambiguity, but of course someone who was married to a woman and had sex with men also saw himself as, I mean, this guy was insane, honestly. He actually carried around his first wife's ashes after she died, and his second wife left him because of...
That's fucking weird, bro.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this.
It is weird. But anyways, yeah, there's like people who are othered, you know, see themselves reflected in the historical other and then naturally want to draw the historical other closer to themselves and try to reconcile those differences. But I think at the end of the day, it's not necessary because we already know that we like wine and the Persians liked wine.
Well, this is the thing that I was going to say, is that actually I think the first translation is the sexiest.
Yes,
Precisely because it leaves so much to the imagination.
And actually, by making it, like, allowing ample possibility for the interpretation that this is about God, including the, you know, male-coded language, is very transgressive in kind of a sexy way. Because
Yes.
it's like, it's about your lover and it's about your relationship with God. And it, again, blurs the line between where the transgressive and the sort of orthodox are.
Yeah, and I think that we've gone on this long tangent to make this elaborate point about the role of alcohol in Islamic culture. But the reason why wine is such a recurrent metaphor in Islamic poetry of this period is because it is such a powerful metaphor, because the most powerful desires are the desires which are prohibited.
Yes.
And the idea of strong, powerful desire, equating that with sensuality and with alcohol and with love of God it's good fucking writing.
Yes.
That's why when I get to the end of, you know, a Rumi poem, I'm like, that's why he's the GOAT.
Our goat will never be washed.
It's been fucking 700 years.
Yes.
And he's still got it. Well, that is just about gonna do us for another episode of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. And if you found that episode to be intoxicating, then please do leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you like, leave a Spotify comment. If you do, Olivia might read one out.
Thank you to M.W. Holman, who says, amazing job with this series, thoroughly enjoyable. Your rendition of this story was even better than the Rest is History guys, IMHO, and definitely had way more MILF and Vax jokes. Thank you. Better than the Rest is History by sheer virtue of MILF and vaccination jokes is exactly what we're going for.
You hear that, Tom Holland? You think you're better than me just because you're Spider-Man?
Tom Fraudland.
Tom Dutch.
Tom de Nederland. Thank you to Dread Pirate CED, who said, I have learned so much from Olivia and Aaron. I didn't have the opportunity to go to college, but this podcast has taken the place of a degree in history for me. Looking forward to future episodes. That's genuinely so heartwarming.
Yeah, that actually
That's
kind
real
of fucked...
kind.
This one kind of fucked me up a
I have
little
no
bit
riff.
when I read it.
I have no riff or joke. That's just super lovely.
Yeah,
And
I
yeah,
think...
don't let the system tell you. I mean, you know, I did go to college. I was lucky to be able to go for free. Scotland, but I didn't study history. But you know, don't let the institutions and the so-called experts keep you from engaging and claiming your own little ownership in your own way of the subject matter. You know, read and find it interesting to your heart's content. History belongs to everybody.
Absolutely, and historians are eventually wrong about everything, so...
Yes.
Don't let them be snooty to you.
And beyond that, although we've consumed a few small beers over the course of recording this podcast, many more await. So
yes, we need to
unfortunately-
get down to Joe Blackjack's Honky Tonk Bluegrass Bassoon Bar for a few more fucking bammies.
Yes!
Let's go!
Yeah, man, okay. Listen, though. You got it, Aaron? Seriously. Cut me off after 5 pints, okay?
I was planning on 15, but
Alright, split the difference, 25.
I'm gonna be taking some bets on which one of the 12 drunkards Olivia will turn out to be.
Come on, 5, please 5.
Alright, until next time, take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.